Good afternoon. This is John Burke. I'm making this video from Riga, where I'm here to teach at Reseba University. I want to talk about two different issues. One is related to the UN Charter, which I spoke about in the previous video. The other is the alternative payment systems developed by the Russian Federation and China. First, the UN Charter. I want to just reiterate that the term force, as used in the UN Charter, has no consensus definition. So let me rephrase. The UN Charter imposes an obligation upon nation states to refrain from the threat of force or the use of force against another nation state to interfere with its political independence or territorial integrity. What is the problem with this term force when we try to apply it to economic and financial sanctions? We have two schools of thought. One school of thought says that force applies only to military action. The other school of thought says no. The other school of thought says that the term can be interpreted very broadly to include economic and financial sanctions because they can harm the political independence and territorial integrity of another nation state. Therefore, the dispute should go through the regular procedures and mechanisms provided for in the UN Charter. Now I want to turn my attention to a different section of the UN Charter, Article 51. So Article 51 deals with the doctrine of self-defense of nation states. It says something to the effect, nothing in this charter shall impair the right of a nation state to use self-defense against an armed attack. Now you would think that that language is pretty clear, but no, it is not. Why? Because the right self-defense for states has been developed historically over a long period of time, and this right of self-defense is complicated, and it includes the right of preemptive self-defense. What does preemptive self-defense mean? It means that a state does not have to wait until it is attacked to invoke the doctrine of self-defense, that it can act before a harm occurs. Of course, there are circumstances that the state must follow in order to invoke this doctrine of preemptive self-defense, and these are spelled out in case law and in general principles of public international law. But we can see that this preemptive right of self-defense differs significantly from the language of self-defense as used in Article 51 of the Charter. And let's take a concrete example. The decision by George Bush to invade Iraq. This was predicated on the United States' right of preemptive self-defense. What was the predicate? The predicate was, it was alleged that Iraq held weapons of mass destruction and was ready to use them against the U.S. or its allies. George Bush took the position that why wait for an injury to occur by the use of these weapons, so let us stop this from happening by invading Iraq. This was problematic because Hans Blix, for about a period of 10 years, could not find any weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. After the invasion occurred, the United States and its allies couldn't find weapons of mass destruction. What happened? Saddam Hussein was assassinated, the country suffered economic damage, and the United States and its allies tried to assemble a provisional government. So I'll leave it at that. So I think this demonstrates the difficulty of using this doctrine of preemptive self-defense because it can lead to error and to destruction, and it violates the principle of the United Nations Charter to settle disputes either peacefully or within the mechanisms that the Charter has established to resolve international disputes. I'll leave it at that. Now I want to talk about the alternatives to SWIFT that have been developed by Russia and China. So in 2014, Russia developed its own system, which is called the System for Transfer of Financial Messages. It was developed starting in 2014 after the Crimean issue and the imposition of sanctions upon the peninsula of Crimea. And it has been further developed. Initially, it was used mainly by foreign entities that are in historically states that have historical relations with Russia, such as Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and others. But recently there has been two important developments. India has agreed to tie itself into this system, and Iran has linked its system to the Russian SPFS. The governor of the central bank has stated that there are approximately 70 foreign financial organizations from 12 countries that use the system. But the bank is reluctant to disclose all of the members because foreign organizations and their respective nation states can then be subject to economic sanctions and financial sanctions on the ground that they are helping Russia to circumvent the economic and financial sanctions. So they could place themselves at risk of being cut off or cut off from the Western financial system and suffering other types of economic sanctions like trade restrictions and so on. Now let's move to the Chinese cross-border interbank payment system, CIPS. This was developed starting about 2015. What is interesting, it is different from SWIFT in that it is not only a financial messaging system, but it is a settlement and clearing facility. Data indicates, at least for 2021, that the transaction value of CIPS grew 84% and reached a US dollar value of 13.4 trillion. So it's not insignificant. But if we compare that with SWIFT during the comparable period, SWIFT had a value payment of 150 trillion. So as of these dates, which are a little bit old, we can see that CIPS is about 10% of the transaction value of SWIFT. But I think this is going to change and change rapidly because the very liberal and generous use and deployment of economic and financial sanctions against states that the U.S. Deems have done something not in the interest of the U.S. or its allies can be subject to economic and financial sanctions and effectively cut off from the Western financial system that was created basically after World War II. So this provides incentives for the development of alternative systems. One final point, Russia, the most sanctioned country, cannot source hardware or software to run their alternative financial messaging system. So this provides an incentive for them to basically develop internally hardware and software that would be able to run these systems completely independent for the West. If you like the video, please subscribe to the channel and give it a like, and I will return soon. Thank you.